With me right now, the man behind this entire project, Dr. Roger Guevara.
Way
welcome.
behind.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And I have to say, this is awesome. I mean, it really is. And in fact, we were here last year,
Right.
And I think it has definitely grown from the last one we had in terms of. And I have no idea, just from me looking, in terms of actual numbers, but from the numbers of students that we've got here, but also in terms of the types of students that are here.
Right.
Last year there were a couple of groups who were kind of the old hats. They knew what was going on, and most of the students were here just to learn about it.
Sure.
This time, it's almost flipped. We got a lot of students here who they've started robotics programs in their school, or they are in the process of starting, and then there were a couple that were still just kind of looking. But it's almost the reverse of what it was last year.
Which is exactly where we wanted to be.
Sure.
One of the keys about education is you expose the students to a challenge, and then you step back and let them do it.
Yeah.
We don't want to micromanage them where we're telling them exactly what to do step by step, because that really takes away all the creativity.
Sure.
And the functionality of being a student, because basically students are here to learn, and what we do as teachers is to expose them to different opportunities that lie before them, and then let them match their learning styles with the available options that are out there, so that they can gravitate to what they want. And fortunately, when it comes down to technology, kids gravitate quite naturally toward that. But still, the role of the teacher is paramount, because they can easily narrow the thinking of this child, or that they can greatly enhance that.
Sure.
And we don't want to have a situation where you just say, okay, you just turn them completely loose. Let's take them through a process, but during that process, if it's a 5-step process, they can do anything that they need to do within these certain parameters. And so you're taking them through step 1, which would be kind of an awareness discovery phase. Step 2 is you start pondering what those questions are. Step 3 is, what are some of the possible solutions that we can have to those questions. Step 4 is you run various trials and see if you can see any kind of consistency there. And then third, or lastly, is you analyze the data that you have and see, was my original hypothesis correct? Did I achieve what I needed to achieve? Yes, sir. How's it going? No, come sit down, have a seat. Yeah, well, that's
he was on
great.
earlier. Yeah.
But it's up to us as educators to make sure that we stimulate the kids in a way that intrigues them, and actually where we almost push them to the brink of frustration almost, and then pull them back a little bit, give them a little bit more resources, and then put that challenge out there, so it's not a piece of cake for them anymore.
Right. Well, and I think that's, to me, I think you really hit the nail on the head. Talking about pushing them to the point of frustration, I think really that's where you see some of the greatest leaps in innovation, when you have these students, especially if you have the ones who, if they have an idea of the way they want something to happen, right? So I think this is what I want to happen, and I think this is how it should happen, and then it doesn't happen that way. And so they try something else, and that doesn't happen that way. And they try something else, and they keep going back, and it keeps not succeeding, and they get to that point of frustration. And sometimes in that moment of just pulling their hair out, and they go, "Oh wait, there it is. Duh! I just had to put this one piece on."
That's right. It's usually something fairly simple. That they've already thought through it, and they said, "Well, I need to tweak this, or I need to tweak that."
Yeah.
But one of my favorite stories, David, that comes to mind, you're familiar with Formula 409? The cleaning solution?
Yeah.
Do you know that story behind it?
No, I don't at all.
Okay, well, Formula 409 gets its name because the developer, the inventor of Formula 409, he had literally tried 408 times to have a winning formula, one that would cut through grease and, and clean and stuff. But none of those were successful. And it is a testimony to tenacity and just stick-withedness, because on his 409th try, he nailed it.
Yeah.
And he became a millionaire, based off of that. So the story for me as an instructor is, very often we're put in a situation where we're in a classroom of 30 kids and they're all different, and you're not going to knock it out of the park for all 30 of those kids in one swoop lesson.
Right.
You're
right.
just not going to do that.
Yeah.
Typically. And so what we have to do is we have to find out what buttons do we push, first of all, to motivate the kids to want to learn, and then what are we doing to truly engage them in what they're doing, and then to allow enough time so that they get that depth that they need to in order to have a learning experience.
Yes, exactly.
And so all these things contribute to kind of the learning process, and it's a difficult task.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well,
it is very difficult.
there was one of the groups of students had come over and visited, and they're just kind of starting out, and so they're still in the process of building their robots. They haven't even gotten into the coding side yet.
Right.
And I said, so what are some of the things that you're finding as you're building the robot? What are the areas where you kind of tend to struggle? And they said, well, one of the biggest problems that they've been having is that they've designed this robot and they put all the pieces on there, and then when they turn it on so that the motors start going, the pieces start flying off everywhere. And they said, so it's one of those things that they're like, we thought we had everything put together just the way it was supposed to be, and yet when we turn it on, pieces are flying. And they're like, well, wait a minute, why is this happening? And it's working through those little things. And it's I'm sure it's well, that bolt wasn't tightened enough there, or that nut wasn't on quite right here, or that screw wasn't tightened down, or whatever it happens to be. It's working through that and seeing where the quote unquote failures are, the 408s,
Right,
until they
right.
get to
No
the
doubt.
409.
And there's no doubt that learning process, if you hand somebody something, that's on practically with the solution, all you had to do is cross the T and dot the I.
Yeah.
That's not much of a learning experience.
No.
It's really not. They have to go through these trials and tribulations in order to make that happen.
Yes. Well, and that's one of the things that, one of the things we often talk about is 3D printing and that type of thing. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when you...
Mr. Watson, can you take our picture right here?
Is when you are... If a teacher hands
Thank you.
the student the website for them to download the 3D printer file, and the student downloads the file and copies it to the printer, and the printer starts printing, you haven't taught that kid anything.
No, nothing whatsoever.
All you've done was teach that kid how to go find something somebody else did and print it out. That's no different than going online, finding a worksheet and printing it out of your regular printer. The difference is this is 3D instead. Well, it's
Big
still
deal.
It's a 3D worksheet. You
Yeah.
know. Now, you take the student who wants to build a 3D Eiffel Tower and help them discover how they program that to make that
That's a
particular
different level.
object, and then they take the file they made and put it into the 3D printer, and now all of a sudden the extruder is making an Eiffel Tower. That's different.
That sure is.
Now, I would also argue that unless that is part of a bigger project, that in itself really isn't all that worth any. I mean, yeah, okay, they learn how to do that. They learn some of the concepts behind how to make the thing, but if they're not solving a problem that needs to be solved, then once again, from my 2 cents, it's essentially still just another glorified worksheet. It's like the old school days when we used to make the Globe Theater in English class. Why are we all building the Globe Theater in English class? What was that? I'm like,
Shakespeare would have been proud.
I guess so. I don't know.
Well, and let's put that in regular educationese, and that is that if, and Mr. Watson, who teaches mathematics, and one of the very best teachers that my daughter has ever had, for sure. Tell me your thinking on this. If you have if you give the students a set of data and you ask them to interpret that data, they're going to have a certain amount of learning experience. But when you have the kids generate the data, put it into the graph, and then ask them to interpret that, what's the difference the two? Which one would you rather have your kids doing?
I'd have them collecting the data themselves and interpreting it. I mean, that's how I was taught back in connected math with a teacher that actually did it right. Was you talked about theoretical probability versus experimental probability. And the theoretical, I'm like, okay, yeah. But the experimental, my group versus this group, our charts, our graphs, that data meant something.
Right.
So if you actually have something involved and you produce the data and then you do something with the data, that's your data, you're involved, it's yours.
Right.
You have ownership of it.
Yes.
You have ownership of your education, and it's not just something I handed you.
Yeah.
Yes, accept.
Well, and I think it's also important that as the students, when they are the ones who are developing the measurement to collect the data, they collect the data, then they interpret the data. At least from my perspective, it seems to me that also lends itself to the students having a better understanding as to how data can be manipulated to say a certain thing. Numbers are numbers, and given the right circumstances, you can make any number say whatever you need them to say.
Yes.
And so by having the students doing that themselves, at least from my perspective, I can see where that would help them interpret that data, at least theoretically and hopefully, as purely as they could, but by the same token also help them understand that really I could make this say whatever I needed to say to make my point.
And that other people could do the same thing and
Right.
present it to you in such a way,
Yeah.
like in your media, your newspaper, your news, and be like, hey, or like you just zoom on, like change the scale on the y-axis, it changes the whole problem.
Right.
Oh,
No doubt.
Look at that slope. Well, those of us who know, like, we check that stuff out, and kids are just like, oh yeah, man, that's pretty steep. That grows pretty quickly.
Right.
But it may not have.
Right.
Just I zoomed in a lot.
Yes.
Changed my scale.
Exactly. Or, there's a Loch Ness monster floating out in the water out there. Yeah, when you're zoomed in all the way so that it looks like it takes up the whole picture, but when you zoom out and see the whole thing, I'm pretty sure that was a log, just that whole perspective kind of thing.
I remember being fascinated with that as a kid. Just like, is it real? Is it
Right.
not?
Yeah.
And you see those commercials on TV, and you're like, if it was real, I'd already heard about it somewhere. They wouldn't have saved it for a TV special on the History Channel.
Right, yes, And it's funny to me, and I know we're bird walking a little here, but it's funny to me that things like that are still, like, they have...
Intriguing.
Well, it's still intriguing, and they're making TV series. So, Bigfoot, which, I grew up, in the 70s, so that was crazy, quote-unquote, real to us, Bigfoot and Loch Ness Monster and all these crazy things. And it's funny to me,
Chariot of the Gods.
all these years later, and people are still like, how old those things would be now? There's no way. But anyway.
Maybe they reproduce.
Well, maybe. That's true. Good point.
But if we can't find them, how hard would it be for them to find a mate?
It's uncharted territory. It's area left unexplored.
Yeah, that's right.
It's neither confirmed nor denied.
Nope,
So
that's right. That's right.
you can't prove that there's not one.
No, that's exactly. That's right.
You can't prove a negative.
Yep.
So
that's right.
where
That's
are
right.
we in terms of getting these kids exposed to technology so that they can in turn apply that to their everyday curriculum? Are we there yet where it happens fairly intuitively, or do we need to work a lot more at it?
We need to work a lot more at it. I'm just now getting there. I know handing a kid a laptop and telling them to do something isn't using technology, though. Mm-hmm. And that's actually over their heads a lot of times because they don't use laptops. It's up in school.
Yeah.
It's tablets, it's phones, it's that interface, which to us, we're like, oh, it's the same thing. Even my age. If you get these kids a laptop, they'll get confused on how to log in, how to do stuff. You hand them a tablet or a touch device, whatever you want them to do.
Yeah.
So I'm starting to integrate technology as I go. I know I have a teacher at school that started using Google Classroom.
Yeah.
And we're just a small school, 200 kids maybe, 7 through 12. And I've even seen in my class where they were doing a geography presentation, and they're like, well, we need to collaborate better. They showed us something in Google Classroom, but I don't even know what it was called, and they were able to work on the same project on different computers at the same time, editing the same file. And I was like, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that was possible. So we're slowly getting there, but like they said in the thing earlier, like staying ahead of them, I don't know how we're...
So, David, what do you think we need to do in order to get them to that point? Because this is what you deal with on a daily basis over at the co-op.
Well, a lot of it is, I would tell you, a lot of it is, well, it goes back to what you're saying, how do we stay ahead? I'll be honest, I don't think we can stay ahead at all.
Because it changes so rapidly?
It changes so quickly, and I don't think it's necessarily our role or our place as educators to try to stay ahead of where things are going, partly because you will never catch up. I mean, you can't even catch up, let alone stay ahead. But I think we can stay informed about things that are coming up, things that are changing, how things are changing, and essentially our role is to give the students the tools and the guidance and the principles to take whatever that technology is. Like you said, with Google Classroom and being able to collaborate and share, helping them understand, okay, so what does that mean? What does that look like? And a lot of times, like your students did, they're the ones who showed you this is how it is. And I think we have to be, as educators, we have to be open and receptive to that kind of thing. And unfortunately, there are still so many who, if there are other educators that had their students come to them with that, they would have been like, no, we're not doing that. I don't know what that is. It's some kind of voodoo witchcraft thing. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that in my classroom. And I think we have to be open to the students being allowed to teach us.
Yes.
We have the life experience and we have the concepts that are much bigger than what the students see right here, right now. So there are a lot of tools and technologies that the students have access to all the time. I take, my son and my daughter, they watch, they're watching YouTube all the time, they're hanging out on Instagram all the time. So they're all the time seeing, this new thing, that new thing. So where my role comes in as a parent / educator is, okay, so you have this new thing called Instagram. Tell me about what it does, what is it, and how could you use that for the better good instead of, the first thing most people want to do is leap to the negative. Oh, what's going to happen here? So I think that's where we can help students learn, is those bigger concepts, collaboration, working with the data, doing data interpretation. What does that look like? What does collaboration look like? So to me, anyway, I think that's where our role is.
Yeah.
A good starting point would be getting your teachers to develop a growth mindset.
Yes.
I've done some PDs on that. I've studied some of that here. Currently, I'm here at SAU getting my administration stuff.
What is your definition of a growth mindset for our audience?
For the purpose, I've heard the things that really resonate with me is being. We tell our kids not to be afraid to be wrong. Is yourself as a teacher, not to be afraid of not knowing where the lesson's going to go, not being afraid of you being wrong, or don't be afraid of your kid being the expert and you being the student for a minute. Be able to go, hey, that's where we need to go. Let's go there. Take me there with you. Show me that, and I'll show you what I know. We'll come together and meet a mission. People want to be able to have everything planned down to the second in the classroom, but you're not leaving any time to respond to how your kids need.
Right.
I find it difficult to plan 2 or 3 weeks in advance, like some people do, because I don't know what I'm teaching Friday until I teach tomorrow, until I teach Thursday.
Yes.
Because I don't know what my kids are going to get. I have an idea where I'd like to go.
Right.
But if I got to drive around the corner to go this way and stop and focus or change my technique for that, like in geometry right now when I'm teaching some of my kids, it's just some of them see it right away, and some of them it takes different color markers, manipulatives going, explaining it a different way, drawing the picture. You got to take your time with the concept, because if you don't teach them the fundamental concept, you're not going to be able to go from there. But a lot of people are afraid to open yourself up to those discussions in class because you may not know the answer.
Right.
And you got to be afraid. You can't be afraid to go, well, let me check on that. Let me check with somebody else. That was my go-to when I first started. When I was teaching Dr. Guevara's daughter here, those kids would ask me questions, college algebra level, college calculus level, like they would see where it was going. And luckily, I had the math background, I could get there, but it wasn't long before I was like, let me go consult some of my textbooks, because I haven't used that in 6 or 7 years,
Sure.
and I'll get you an answer.
Yeah.
And even to this day, I've had someone come and go, you showed us so much further than anybody else ever showed us or are willing to. We'd ask questions, like, we'll get to that later. You were like, all right, let's go there.
Right.
What do you have?
Yes.
Come with the ride for me. Hey, you 2 or 3 in the back aren't there. Follow this ride. I know it doesn't make a lot of sense right now, but let's see where it's going for these other people.
Right.
Oh, that's where it's going, and once you give a purpose, it's there.
You know, and that goes back to our curriculum, because instead of skimming the surface on so many different standards, just skip from one to another, say, well, I went over that. Well, there's a big difference between going over something and having the students actually understand to the appropriate depth that we're requiring them to understand when it comes down to the types of assessments that they're being exposed to now.
Right.
So we really have to rethink our curriculum and to think, okay, if I'm teaching geometry, what are the handful of concepts that I really want them to be able to master, and then to be able to transfer to other similar but different circumstances. That way that they can learn basically and figure it out.
That's my thought process, is I teach them the fundamentals, and if I don't get to something later on, hopefully they can take what I taught them and apply it in that new way. And I get in this argument with teachers all the time. You know how we are. We get around, we talk, we do stuff, and they're like, I'm so far behind on my map. Where are you on your map? It's like, I'm where my students need me to be. Mm-hmm. If I don't finish the book, that's fine with me. But I will put my kids against your kids any day and just see what happens. Now, you may score higher, may not, whatever in the end, but my kids' confidence level is, like, I've had them tell me every year, Mr. Watson, we greatly appreciate, we love that you go at our pace.
Yeah.
I don't ever feel rushed. You wait until we move on. Now, I've also had a student who actually, it's small town, knows my mother and was talking to her the other day, and she's in my Algebra 3 class instead of taking the college class because it wasn't going to transfer where she was going. And she goes, he's a great teacher. He explains everything. He's got the kids involved in class that flunked math all the way up to here. They're trying to get through senior. They're passing. They're engaged every day. But she goes, he's teaching to them because he knows we know how to do everything. He makes us do all the work, and then we just sit back there and watch. She goes, I wish we'd been taught that way since 7th grade.
Yeah.
I see what he's doing, but I am bored out of my mind because we should have already moved on.
Right.
But it's a class that's 90% of remediation level, lower level kids, and I'm trying to provide them that foundation. The same kids from last year that graduated and came to SAU are passing college algebra. They're messaging me, emailing me. Parents have come up crying, thank you. Like that hits you in the heart.
That's
when a parent
gratifying.
comes up at graduation, hugging you, crying. I just want to introduce myself to you. I'm so-and-so's parent. Without you, we wouldn't have made it here today.
Right.
And then that same kid emails you in September a picture of his grades in college. Look at this. That's because of you.
Yeah.
And that reminds you of why you do what you do.
Yes. Yes.
Well, and that's why we have to have reevaluate the role of administration. You talked about that earlier, because in the old days, just because you've been there the longest, or you're the tallest, or you can have great classroom management, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're an instructional leader.
Right.
And so what we have to do is to make sure that we put the young teachers in a position for success, that we give them the resources, that we give them good professional development, that we are visiting their classrooms, we're participating along with the students and saying, hey, this is important, I'll be part of this discussion. And not be scared not to know what the answer is. If I walk into an organic chemistry class or something, I haven't taken that in a long
anywhere
time.
and not know the answer. We hate, as people, we've been trained that way. If we don't know the answer, it's not a good thing.
Right.
So we have to reinvent ourselves in education and move towards this more progressive type of style. And also, I really think that the technology is an excellent bridge to get us there. That because people will gravitate towards that, that we can use that as well. It's just a nice little hook that happens to be tremendously effective when it's appropriately done.
Sure.
It petrifies me, the thought of becoming an administrator. Like, I'm getting the classes now, and it's not because it's not something I want to do. I'm just afraid I'm going to fail at it because it's different. But then I'm also like, I love what I'm doing.
Yeah. I
love helping these kids. I love finding the new stuff. I love going where they're got, and I don't want to lose that. So I got to learn when I get in there how to incorporate. Connie Wilson said something here in the summer at one of our professional developments. It said, principal means principal teacher. And that really said, I actually wrote a paper in her class and used that, and she highlighted it. I love this quote. And I said, that's actually from you. You told me that.
Of course you love it.
She goes, I did? And I said, yeah. I said, that really stayed home with me, though, because that makes more sense, because so long in my life I've had great principals modeled as just men, older, been there the longest, or came in somewhere, firm, know how to deal with things. none of them have been involved in curriculum. Even with tests, you see them and they're pulling their hair out, not knowing how to do these evaluations. Whereas my vision of me as a principal, I want to be involved in everybody's classroom.
Right.
I want to see I don't want to be the harasser that's in the back of the room watching every day, making teachers uncomfortable, but I want to know what's going on. I want to know how I can help you be better you.
Right.
And I'm petrified that I can't do that.
Well, I think a lot of that is. I think one of the biggest obstacles that you're probably going to face is the folks that have been there, and there's a lot of times we try to push this off on long-term teachers who have, who are kind of set in their ways, but there are some brand new teachers that, frankly, they've come out of, and I realize I'm sitting at a university that teaches educators, but at a lot of universities, part of the problem that new educators have is that they are given the theory and the background of education without necessarily this is what it actually looks like in the classroom.
Absolutely.
So you get some new teachers who are also set in ways that they didn't even realize they were set in, and so I think as an administrator who, I see where you're wanting to go, and I think it's awesome, and I think. First of all, I hope you never lose that as you continue in an administrative role, if and when you get to that point. But I think a lot of that is that being in that position, you also get to set and define and refine that culture that's in that building. And sometimes, and this is the hardest pill to swallow, I think, but sometimes it's a rubber meets the road, as the vernacular down here is. Sometimes you got to have a come to Jesus meeting, and outline and say, this is the way we are going. This is the path that I'm taking, and yes, there's going to be little offshoots, and it's not a straight path. It's going to kind of meander. It's going to go this way, but I need you to come with me.
Yep.
However, if you're not comfortable with that, and this is not the path you ultimately want to come down, then maybe it's time we part ways, and this is where our paths fork, and you go a different direction, and I continue down this one. I have a great example of that many years ago now. I was with a group of people, and we went up to one of the school districts in Northwest Arkansas, and they were doing a complete changeover in terms of what technology in the schools looked like, what technology integration looked like. I mean, it was a complete overhaul. And one of the questions I asked the principal in charge of the building, I said, so what about the people who, came kicking and screaming and dragging their feet? And he said, the ones that came kicking and screaming and dragging their feet came. He said they still came along. Took them a little longer to get there, but they still came along. He said the other ones that dug in their heels and wouldn't go, he said, they no longer work at this district. And sometimes, that's the ugly truth, but sometimes that's ultimately what it comes down to. And you hope it doesn't get to that point, especially in a small town, where everybody knows everybody, and that's my grandma you just sent to the curb, and But by the same token, I think that if you're able to express that vision and demonstrate that vision, and you get the folks who they're not only not kicking and screaming, they're the ones that are skipping down the lane right along with you. Use those as the kind of the showcases to say, this is what we're trying to do. I think your vision is going to be awesome, especially for such a small district.
I got to go make an announcement
and
get ready,
absolutely.
but thank you so much for the time.
Absolutely. I appreciate you sitting down, hanging out.
Always.
So we're getting
he always
ready.
ropes me into everything.
Yes.
But you're exactly right. When I was a new teacher, I remember doing things the same way my teachers did for me because it worked, and then realizing I was at a lower income, different type place. They didn't have a clue what I was doing, and I had to stop right there.
Yeah.
And not many of us would stop.
Right.
Some of us just keep going.
Right.
And so many times I hear what he said. Yeah, I covered that. Covering and teaching and understanding 3 different things.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Three
Exactly
different
right, man.